So hello and welcome to another Flower of Light Mystery School podcast. And again, today is with me is Christine.
How do you do?
And Charlotte.
Hello, everyone.
So today I was just going to talk about, I know in the last podcast we spoke about Akhenaten climbing the mountain, which was the pyramid. But I just wanted to say, I'm not suggesting that Akhenaten was the only person that ever did that. I was just using him as a well-known character, if you like. So just to make it clear that, you know, that was the process for every mystery school initiate to do the same thing.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, I just wanted to
Clarify that.
Yeah. So, because it might have sounded like I was saying he was the only person that ever did it, but in actual fact, of course, it was Akhenaten who restarted the mystery schools. And kind of an interesting point about it is the most amount of women that actually went through the mystery schools with Akhenaten were women.
Yeah.
Wow.
They were the most amount of people that actually went,
Yeah.
went
so the
all the
major
way.
initiates were all female.
Yeah.
Wow.
I could see that's another reason why the priesthood would not be happy.
Well, yeah, but well, I suppose the thing about Akhenaten is he's always considered like a sun worshipper, you know.
Yeah.
And that's where we were talking about the religion and how religions came from, all of that. So that kind of brings me to another point I was kind of going to talk about as well, about Akhenaten, you know, because these people were actually, you know, highly advanced.
Yeah.
They understood, for example, like quantum physics and things like that.
Yeah.
Mm. Wow.
So yeah, it's been like really dumbed down, if you know what I mean.
Oh yeah, all of our science, I think, is missing major chunks of it, right?
One other thing, another point actually that I just want to say before I continue, and I probably did mention it in another podcast, but we talked about the Tower of Babel
Yes.
in the last podcast, and one of the things I didn't say was that Babel, the word Babel, is actually two words. It's Bab El,
Yes.
and Bab means gate,
Oh.
and El is a name for God, and Elohim is more than one gods.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
So Babel is why the Tower of Babel was called the gate to God.
Wow.
Babel actually means gate to God.
God gate.
Yeah, exactly. So on that note, excuse the pun, you might understand that a bit later on in the podcast.
Yeah.
But on that note, I mentioned that El is a name for God, for example. So we have words like electricity. Yeah.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Oh, so like... God.
Elect, elevate.
Wow.
So words with L.
Whoa.
So
Yeah.
so there was many as we were talking about, the name for God was I am that I am. We mentioned that in the last podcast.
Yeah.
But I also mentioned that it could be translated also to I am who I am, which brings me to another point. So I mentioned that El was a name for God. So
Yeah.
in ancient Egypt, the Sphinx, for example, had different names, and one of the oldest name for the Sphinx was Hu, H-U, and Hu was, well, as Champollion translated hieroglyphs and it was translated into English, the word neater was translated into the word God and goddess, but the word neater never meant God and goddess. So anyway, just in the translation of how, you know, we kind of understand it now. So I'm just going to say that Hu was considered a god in ancient Egypt.
And nature meant nature, right?
Yeah, I'll explain that now in a minute. But just for now, I'll just say, in our understanding, what we think of today as it's been translated for us, somebody would say that Hu represented a god. Okay, but I'll explain that further in a few minutes. So if we think of, say, the Bible, for example, we were talking about Bible, again, the same thing. If we were talking about it says in the Bible, in the beginning was the Word. Yeah? And the Word was with God. And God said, let there be light. That's the beginning of the book of Genesis. So the Word is the divine sound, if you like, or the divine utterance. And in ancient Egypt, okay, I just said that we would, based on Champollion's translations of the hieroglyphs, the word Neter was translated into God. So our present understanding would think of it that way. But in the ancient mind, in the mind of the people that we're talking about, they didn't consider Hu as a god, because they understood the whole concept, as we discussed in the last podcast, of I am that I am, or I am who I am. So
I am who I am.
yeah. So what Akhenaten really was doing was he understood, as I mentioned, the concept of the law of one, which states there is one consciousness. There is only one intelligent consciousness, which is the energy of love. And that's to do with the whole kind of weighing of the heart part of the Book of Coming Forth by Light, if you like. But so he was never worshipping the sun.
Yeah.
That was never what he was doing. It was really advanced information that they understood. So anyway, Hu was the divine sound, and Hu is considered, the name is pronounced twice. So you would say Hu, like an owl, you know, the sound an owl makes.
There you go.
So Hu was considered to be the first and last breath of creation. And you see on the walls, kind of in the temples as well, where Akhenaten's symbol was always the Aten, in other words, the sun disk, and then the ray is coming out of the disk with the hands, and often the hands would hold ankhs as well.
Yeah.
Wow.
In the end of the hand.
The little hands, yeah.
And you see them holding the ankh up to the mouth or the nose, as if you were breathing it in, like the breath of life. So, I mean, there's been a lot of different theories, you know, as to what that is, and what, you know, what they were talking about. So this is the kind of whole where the whole sun worshipping thing would have evolved from, if you know what I mean.
Oh yeah.
Do you think maybe they interpreted as sun worshipping because they knew they wanted to disassociate it from what it really was, you know? Or they just didn't understand?
Both, I'd say.
Okay.
So
like a way to make it even less apparent what it really was, you know?
Yeah, I'd say there was an element of they didn't understand themselves. You mean people in more modern times? Is that what you mean?
I'm thinking like archaeologists and things like that.
Yeah, well, I mean, when you withhold information, like, it's easy to kind of, all you have to do is withhold information from one generation.
That's it.
And then
you
you've
lose
broken
it.
the chain.
And you've broken the chain.
Yeah.
So, yeah, it would be probably people not understanding it that were finding it or whatever. And then mistranslation of words, as I said, that's the Tower of Babel.
Yes.
It's the language, you know. So anyway, what I really kind of wanted to say was, in terms of Akhenaten and what we were talking about, and him, you know, the whole sun worshipping thing, I just want you to think in terms of Nikola Tesla and what Nikola Tesla understood about the radiant energy of the sun.
Yeah.
All right.
And if anybody has kind of studied any of Nikola Tesla's work, they'll probably have more of an understanding. But Nikola Tesla himself said that he rediscovered the knowledge of the ancient pyramid builders. And he was like the most... Einstein was once asked, what's it like to be the most intelligent man in the world? And he said, I don't know, you'll have to ask Nikola Tesla. So even Einstein knew that Nikola Tesla was far more advanced.
Wow.
And had we gone down the path that Nikola Tesla was presenting, we would have free energy.
Yeah.
You know?
Oh yes, of course.
But anyway, so that's kind of what I'm talking about. That these ancient people understood. So Akhenaten, if you can think of Akhenaten in terms of Nikola Tesla, as opposed to a sun worshipper.
Yeah.
You know.
He was highly advanced. He wasn't like, you know.
Yeah, highly advanced. Yeah. And the idea of the Neter, for example. So we've said nature, you know. So when we think of like the elements, you know, the earth, air, fire, water, and, you know, the fifth element.
Ether.
The fifth element is
element.
ether or neter.
Yeah.
You know? Ether or neter
Oh, there you go.
is the fifth element. So So they would have considered, like, we think like there's kind of 3 states of matter. That's the way we consider matter, you know.
Yeah, liquid, gas, solid, I guess.
Yeah, solid, liquid, gas. And so then, in their mind, they would have had like plasma,
Yeah,
Yeah.
plasma energy. Yeah.
which is kind of immediate. It's the last stage in solid matter, I suppose, before it goes into ether, if you know what I mean.
Plasma.
Plasma, it's like
That's not like lava or something, is it now?
well, it's radiant matter. It's
Radiant
what I
matter.
suppose what they call dark energy as well, or dark matter.
Okay.
It wouldn't be photonic energy. would it?
Yeah, it's like liquid. It's like liquid light.
Yeah, liquid light. That's it. Yeah.
Oh wow.
Basically, what we are.
Yes.
Plasma. So, you know, I mentioned before about, like, say, the fire festivals in Ireland as well,
Oh yes.
and around Samhain and things like that. So, and those fires would have been lit all over Ireland. So I mentioned that they, you know, say for example, they took the light from the light of the sun. So if you think about a kind of a, you know, a fairly simple thing of kind of, well, it's simple because we know how to do it, but using the light, say, to light a piece of paper on fire and then start a fire from it.
Yeah.
That's what we mentioned that they were doing. It wasn't just that they were lighting fires; they were taking the light of the sun. That was the important part.
Yeah.
They were bringing the light of the sun to the earth and keeping it alive in the fire all over the island of Ireland throughout the dark months. That was the Samhain lighting of the fires.
Which is coming up.
But yeah,
On Saturday.
but if you go a step further in terms of the lighting of the fires, you know, like, or sorry, using the energy of the sun, for example, to light the fire. So if you can imagine that, there's a lot of people that talk about how they cut huge stones in not just ancient Egypt, all over the world. How they managed to cut like really huge solid stones of like diorite and dolerite and granite, which are like the hardest stones to use. That's why they're not used today. Like diorite and dolerite aren't used today because it's really hard and a brittle stone. So if you
Dense.
try to tool it in any way, if you try to use any tools on it,
They break.
diorite and dolerite like kind of shatters,
Yeah.
you know. But yet you find in ancient Egypt statues that are perfectly anatomically correct statues, full life-size statues, like some over 6 foot life-size, and then you have other ones that are like 60 foot, you know, and they're perfect, made out of diorite and dolerite. So they don't know how they did it, like, you know, there's a whole thing like how did they do that, you know, and how did they fit stones together without using any mortar or anything in between, you know, because it's like the stones were melted together almost.
Yeah.
Plasma.
Like the stones in the Sphinx Valley Temple at Giza. They're huge stones, and the stones themselves are actually bent in around to make a corner. It's
Yeah.
Wow.
I've seen it.
it's like the stone is bent, you know. It's like they actually just bent the stone. It's unbelievable. So there's been people that have looked at it and said that it looks like they could actually liquefy the stone. They had found a way to liquefy it
Wow.
and be able to mould it into shape, and then the stone would harden again
Taste your plasma.
and be in the shape, you know. So if you think as well, there was an awful lot of like, say for example, I'm just taking this as an example, on the Giza Plateau there's loads of in fact the whole plateau is, at one time there's some of the stones left, but not all of them, but there's a large amount of basalt stone in front of the Great Pyramid, and it was it would have been all over the ground, if you know what I mean, huge pieces of basalt making a floor, if you like, or a walkway up to the pyramid. And black, highly polished basalt.
Oh wow. It's like a mirror.
Exactly. It would have mirrored the stars.
To the sky.
Oh wow.
So
you could see all the
at
constellations
night, if you were
going
walking around outside the pyramids, it's like you're walking on the stars, because you would have a mirror under your feet. You would see the stars.
Well, that's like the Irish, right? With the harnessing the light of the sun and keeping it on Earth. So
Yeah.
those ancients did.
Yeah.
As above,
exactly.
so below, right?
Exactly. And of course, they would have been star workers as well.
That's what I was
You know,
going to
and
say,
star workers. But Giza was the greatest mystery school of all of them. I mean, that was where all the final initiations took place. So they found stones and things around the Giza Plateau that, like that basalt walkway. And they don't know how, because the stones are like, 100 tons, 60 tons, they're huge stones, they're not little small stones. And even just pieces of granite that have been cut that are left lying around on the Giza Plateau. And not just that, but I mean the pyramid itself, all of it, But the sarcophagus and there's all these kind of drill holes that they've found in granite as well.
Ooh.
Now the thing about drill holes is interesting is because you can actually measure the speed at which the drill was going in by measuring the marks that whatever was spinning. And people have done it. There's a guy called Chris Dunn. He wrote a book. I'm sure he's written more than one anyway, but it's called The Giza Power Plant.
Oh, yeah.
Very interesting. He's a mechanical engineer, I think. But I think it was him who measured the rotation spin of whatever it was that was drilling these cores,
Wow.
And I don't know the exact speed, but I know that he found the drill speed rate was actually faster than anything we have.
Today.
So whatever they were drilling with was spinning around faster than anything we have today to make those holes in granite or diorite, or which is the hardest stone.
There you go.
So it's only diamond tipped drills that can really go through granite or diorite. Not even diorite, to be honest, it'll shatter.
Diamond tipped.
Diamond tipped, yeah. But you see, the thing is, we're told that in ancient Egypt they only had copper.
Yeah.
So copper can't cut through granite. It's copper is softer than granite. It'll never cut through granite.
Yeah.
So obviously that's not what they were using,
Yeah.
So what I'm kind of saying here is, if you think of the divine word or the divine sound or the divine utterance, if you like, and then bring Akhenaten in the sense of him and the light, that's what he's associated with, So if you look at those two things, sound and light, and that's what they were, like Ra, for example. Ra is the sun, or the light of the sun, All the concepts they had in ancient Egypt were highly advanced concepts that were totally misunderstood and mistranslated to mean what the people of the time understood themselves. They couldn't understand what the ancient people knew, so they just mapped on what they thought themselves. I mean, you can imagine, say you're a first year student of whatever you're studying, archaeology, we'll say, since we're on the topic. In your first year, you can't know what your professor knows. Do you know what I mean? You can't. You will learn it along the way, but you won't sit there in your first year and know what your professor knows.
Yeah.
And I'm just making a comparison to the people who found all this ancient stuff, the archaeologists, for example. They were like the first year students.
Yeah.
And they were finding stuff they didn't know what it was.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? The professor wasn't there to ask.
Yeah.
The professors were gone.
Exactly.
So they just guessed. Do you know what I mean? And came up with whatever they came up with. But
Or
anyway.
even a very limited definition.
But what I'm saying anyway is how they did what they did. I'm just posing the theory here. I'm not saying anything. I'm just saying.
Yeah, I know.
So we have, for example, all over the world, the idea of using sound like cymatics. If anybody wants to look up cymatics, it's how sound affects matter. So if you look at like Buddhist monks, and they're kind of well known for being able to levitate, things like that, But not just them, but I mean, look at like structures all over the world that have these huge, massive stones, and some of them are like 2,000 tons of one solid stone. There's a stone in Aswan, the unfinished obelisk. I think it's about 1,200 tons. Wow. But there's nothing capable of lifting that weight today. Nothing. But yet they were doing it like with ease in the ancient world when they're only supposed to have copper chisels. Do you know what I mean? It's impossible. So anyway, what I'm saying is, say for example, rather than being sun worshippers and all these people who had all these millions of gods that we're told, right? My thinking on it is, what if Akhenaten was like Nikola Tesla? And he understood the radiant energy of the sun. So, for example, they could, like we were talking about, narrowing the beam of the light of the sun to light a piece of paper.
Mm-hmm.
Well, what if they could use the light of the sun, like a laser beam,
Ooh.
to cut really hard stone? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
What if they understood how to levitate stone using sound? Like who? You know, the sound of who?
Mm-hmm.
Because, you know, scientists have discovered that our kind of universe, if you want to say, has an overall sound.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a 7.23 sine wave centimetres,
Yeah.
7.23 centimetre sine wave. And the sound of that is meant to be AUM.
Mm-hmm.
That's meant to be the overall sound of our universe, the background noise, if you like.
Mm.
Which is interesting as well. I mean, how would they have known?
Yeah.
It took modern scientists with like equipment and stuff like that, you know. But yeah, you know, ancient people have been chanting Om for a long time.
Yeah.
And even if you think of Amen,
Yeah.
Yeah. Amen.
you know.
Amen. Amen.
So just kind of on the idea of sound as well, somebody mentioned the other day about a harp. They were talking about a harp, and I know, Charlotte, you play the harp and you're
Mm-hmm. You probably
Very
hear
good.
it to be opening of this podcast.
and of course the harp is the symbol for Ireland as well,
Exactly.
which is quite interesting because
Yeah.
the person that was talking to me today, the other day, was talking about, you know, the 432
Yeah.
frequencies.
Yes. Yeah.
So there was a point in time that the kind of I'm not very musical, Charlotte, so you might be able to help me. There was a point in time at which the frequency to which all musical instruments were tuned was changed,
Mm-hmm.
and it was changed from 432 to 440, which is what we have today.
Mm-hmm.
So the 432 frequency that all instruments would have been played at
Mm-hmm.
in more earlier times.
Mm-hmm.
That number is embedded in all ancient cultures, if you like, and civilizations all around the world. So, like, it's a really important number. So, for example, in India, the yugas are measured in cycles of 432,000 or 432 million. They're all mentioned in those cycles of numbers, if you like.
Yeah.
And if you look at the Great Pyramid, I mentioned this, I think, in the last podcast as well. The Great Pyramid is a scale model of the Earth on a scale of 1 to 43,200.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's 432. That's the same
Yeah.
number. Do you know what I mean? So the whole thing, well, I don't want to get into this too much because it's a bit complicated, but if you add 432 together, you get 9.
Yeah.
So the whole thing, if you think of Nikola Tesla, he said, if you want to understand the universe, think in terms of vibration and frequency, and the numbers 369.
That's right. Yeah.
There you go.
So if you think of 369, really, they're just higher harmonics of 3. Like, so you have 3, 6 is 2 3s,
Mm-hmm.
and 9 is 3 3s.
There you go.
So if you want to break it down, it's kind of 3.
3.
But that's all to do with geometry and cycles as well, you know. But so what I'm kind of saying is that, you know, these people like Akhenaten in the ancient world, who were kind of given the idea that they were sun worshippers and they were, you know, were actually like really highly advanced. So you could think of Nikola Tesla having discovered all the information of Akhenaten, you know, because, you know, I'm saying using the light of the sun and sound for example, cutting and levitating stone.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
But in Armana, which is where when Akhenaten moved all his people, when Akhenaten left Luxor and moved all his people, well, he didn't move them, people followed him that wanted to go with him. And he moved to the centre of Egypt and he built his city, if you like, called Akhetaten,
Yeah.
or today it's called Tel El Amarna. There's nothing of it left now because they smashed it all down and
Just
Oh,
foundation.
no.
Just foundations. Foundations.
yeah, there's a couple of things
And
but
tombs.
there's not much. Yeah, there's a couple of tombs and that, but there's not much. It's like Malkata in Luxor on the West Bank as well. That was where Amenhotep III and Akhenaten would have lived, the palace of Malkata.
Wow.
Again, there's nothing left of that either. Mind you, it was made of mud brick. You see, the palaces that they lived in was made of mud brick, and the temples were made of stone like
Wow.
granite, because they were meant to
Last
survive
for
forever.
eternity.
The temple was the Perba, which is the house of the soul.
Yeah.
All the tombs were Per Ka, which is the house of the your Ka is like the personality, the person you think you are, like your life force,
Okay.
you know. And I think I mentioned it before, the pyramid was called Per Neter, which is the house
Yes.
of the Neter, or as we just mentioned, the house of ether.
Mm-hmm.
But the pyramid had many different names as well. Another name for the pyramid was called Takhut, which means the light. And interestingly enough, the Great Pyramid has 8, not 4 faces.
It does.
Yeah.
Yes, and had polished white limestone casing stones. And there's a whole thing, I know we talked before about the capstone and was there or wasn't a capstone.
Mm-hmm.
But there is information to say that there was a capstone and it was a gold. So what you have is this 8-sided figure covered in white limestone with a gold capstone. So it was an energy device.
Yeah.
And it kind of reflected and refracted the sunlight.
Wow.
So if anybody's ever been in Egypt and they've been in the Valley of the Kings, for example, the Valley of the Kings has all white alabaster stone on the floor, on the ground, as you're walking through it. And as the sunlight hits it on a really strong sunny day, as the sunlight hits the white alabaster, it literally blinds you.
Yeah.
You can't. It's like snow blindness,
Wow.
you know. So if I can just imagine the sun shining on the Great Pyramid
You'd be
when it
like-
was covered in white limestone,
Yeah.
you would have seen it from miles
for
around.
miles away. Yeah.
From
Yeah.
miles around.
When it
Oh,
would
yeah.
be like glowing.
So
Yeah.
Sun on it.
getting back to Tell Armana, sorry, I went off topic there.
That was good though.
So light and sound wasn't just used for, say, levitating stone and cutting stone.
Mhm.
It was used for a lot of things. But for example, it also would have been used for healing. So
Ooh.
let's say in Armana, they had all the temples, all their core, the temples, the areas they would have built were all open. They had no roofs, ceilings,
Okay.
because they wanted the sunlight. Because
Cool.
Akhenaten was all about the sunlight, and so they had areas that had all different coloured crystal stones and things like that. And somebody would lie inside on a bed and the sun would shine through. But like say you're inside, it would be like a rainbow of light coming through,
Wow.
because they would shine through all these different coloured crystals and stones.
Yes.
And the person would lie inside this chamber just bathing in the light. And one of the things about those people was they lived like extraordinary lengths of time, Also at Saqqara. Saqqara is in relation to the chakras of the body, because all the areas in Egypt relate to chakras of the body. So at Saqqara it's to do with the throat, which is to do with sound.
Yeah.
And so at Saqqara, anybody who's been will know that
I love Saqqara. I have been.
the sound healing chambers at Saqqara.
Wow.
And so they
Still
would have used them in all. I'm not just saying Saqqara, I'm only taking it as an example. They would have used that in Armana and in Luxor and in
Every place there were people, there would have been.
well, this was the ancient science. They would have used it
Yeah.
everywhere. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's how they lived so long.
Yeah.
Because they didn't get sick. You see,
So,
because your body isn't supposed to get, like, if you look in the Bible, it says how people lived like 900 years, 1,000 years.
Yeah.
And then as the book of Genesis goes along, as it goes from the descendants of Adam and Eve, the years get smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller until the average lifespan now is 72, I think.
yeah.
Wow.
Back then it was like way longer. They'll tell you that people died back then in their 30s, like, but that's just part of the crap
Delusion.
they talk about
Mm-hmm. With their copper tools.
with their copper tools.
Well, the thing is, in Saqqara,
And Zahi
you
House
can
with his big
see
hat.
you can see within one of the chambers. My own experiences, the little hospital rooms. there was a crystalline bed they laid on, right? The side.
Well, I
of it
don't
is
know. They'd
off-
call them hospital, but
Well, that's just like a modern interpretation.
healing. Yeah.
Healing. I don't know what
Infirmary.
they called them, but then there was a square box for doing the sound, the kind
Yeah.
of do re mi fa so to resonate. So it was a resonant chamber.
Sound healing. Yeah.
So the sound would be affecting the cellular
Oh
body.
yeah. Cymatics.
Cymatics, yeah.
Same.
Like
This
Raymond
is really
Royal Rife.
advanced. Yeah. So yeah, exactly. Good point, Christine. If anybody has ever, or if you haven't, look up Raymond Royal Rife, or Royal Raymond Rife, I think it is.
Yeah, I think it's Royal. Got
Yeah,
backwards,
I know. I get it backwards as well.
Oh, okay.
But anyway, he was a guy in the 50s who discovered just what we're talking about, that sound and light can annihilate every.
Yeah, every
illness,
bacteria,
anything.
any whatever in your body.
So-
and he was promptly put out of business.
Well,
and
unfortunately, nobody really knows what happened, but his laboratory went on fire.
what a surprise!
Yeah.
Everything, and then he died as well.
It seems to
Wow.
happen quite a lot, but so the sound and healing, I think, was a really a big part of how they kind of lived for so long, if you know what I mean. But so they also had areas in the temple that they would use for dreaming. So there would be, say, somebody would go in, they would lie down, they would sleep, they would dream, and then they would be, obviously they would interpret their own dreams, but there would be somebody there as well if they needed, help, for example, to interpret their dreams.
Wow.
And there would be people there that would be able to enter a dream with a person.
Wow.
It's
Dream
kind of, if you
walking.
look at Sufi and the zikr.
Shamans as well.
Yeah, the zikr they do in Sufi, it's a bit like that, There's one person when they're doing the zikr, it's a thing that they do in Sufi. That's kind of like the mystical Islam. And they all, there's a woman's one and a man's one, but they do them kind of separately anyway. But in certain areas, maybe they join together, in other areas, I don't know. But I know in Egypt anyway, they do them separately, and all the men they chant, they do all this kind of chanting. And there's somebody there with a drum, and they play a drum, and all the men chant, and they make these movements, and they do it all at the same time.
Yeah.
But there's one leader there who's keeping kind of an eye on everybody, and
Like
he's
an
banging the
anchor.
drum, and he's the main shaman, if you want to say. And so the purpose of this whole thing is to go on an out of body experience. So one by one, the men will drop down to the ground. They'll fall as soon as their consciousness, their life force leaves their body. They'll drop onto the ground. But the one shaman, the main man who's banging the drum and keeping an eye on everybody, he's actually capable of going out into everybody's journey all at the same time with everybody that's going out, and to help them and guide them, and
Wow.
so it's quite an amazing thing. But that would again be a residual thing from
Yeah.
ancient Egypt, if you like.
Well, there you go.
So
It's not all lost.
yeah.
No, exactly.
Yeah. So, well, actually, yeah, because I mean, what I was saying there about the pyramid as well. Sorry, not the pyramid, the harp. But it's not a Freudian slip, because geometrically, the harp and the pyramid are the same. Because all the information that's encoded in the Great Pyramid, in terms of geometry, numbers, and ratios, are all encoded in the harp as well.
Really?
Yeah. So, I mean, actually, there's quite a lot of really good writers, thinkers, if you like, that have suggested that the harp actually could be the Ark of the Covenant. Because the Ark of the Covenant is about information.
Yeah.
Like, what is the Ark of the Covenant? Okay. The Ark of the Covenant is where apparently Moses put the law, the tablets of the law, into the Ark of the Covenant. Isn't that what it says? But the interesting thing about the Ark of the Covenant is you're given the dimensions of the size of the Ark of the Covenant in the Bible.
But you don't know what's in it.
Well,
what you
they
do,
tell
sorry.
you. I think they tell you that the tablets of Moses, the law. Remember, he went up the mountain
Yeah.
and he got the law. But it's the second set of tablets that went into the Ark of the Covenant, according to the Bible.
As we talked about last time.
And what else? The rod of Aaron, I think.
Yeah, the rod of Aaron. Yeah.
And anyway,
Is it like a shield or something? Or?
the rod of Aaron. Well, the rods are interesting as well. But the rod of Aaron. Aaron's also Akhenaten. Like
Yeah.
Aaron and Moses in the Bible are Akhenaten and Thutmose,
Okay.
who was Akhenaten's brother. I think I mentioned before that the one they call Tutankhamun may possibly be not Akhenaten's son, but his younger brother Tutmos.
Yeah, exactly.
Because Tutmos disappeared at one point, and nobody ever knows where he went.
Wow.
Anyway, that's getting off.
Well, because you only have the modern word of, the body that they found there in the is Tutankhamun, and the furniture and stuff. But
I mean, who found it? Lord Carnarvon and what's his name again? Howard Carter.
Howard Carter.
How could I forget that?
Yeah, exactly.
So so it's like there's a story in Egypt as well, in ancient Egypt, mythology, that talks about the harp or the lyre. So it talks about, in the mythology, it says that it was Thoth who created the first lyre.
Yeah.
By stretching a string over a turtle shell.
Yeah.
And then it talks about how when he plucked the string, like, he got a certain sound, and then he divided it in half, and then he divided it again, and he divided. So what we're talking about here is mathematical ratios or even geometrical ratios.
Mm-hmm.
So if you have one string and you depress it or divide it and pluck one side of it, you'll get a higher. Say if you get one string and you put a, what do you call it, that you press the string down on a guitar, a fret, is it?
Yeah.
And you pluck one side of it, and then the other side, you'll get two higher notes than the one string before it was depressed, plucked together. So if you keep doing that, you'll create the musical scale. And the musical scale can also be, maybe I'll say it this way. Who was it that said this? I forget now anyway, but it's an ancient philosopher or said architecture is music in stone.
Yeah, frozen.
Frozen music. So in other words, say for example the Great Pyramid. The Great Pyramid could be played. In fact, somebody did.
Wow, really?
I forget who it is now, but somebody did actually write a Great Pyramid as a piece of music and played it, because all you have to do is get all the mathematical ratios and notes, and then you get the notes, and then you just play it as a piece of music.
Mm-hmm.
And I forget who that was now. Maybe you can research that if you're interested. But all the information, as I mentioned, that's contained in the Great Pyramid, numerically, mathematically, geometrically, and in the proportions, like the canon of proportions, if that's what I mean when I say that, like the golden number, the golden ratio, pi, phi, all those kind of, they were all incorporated into the harp. But it's interesting that Thoth is considered to be the one who created the first lyre by stretching the first string over a turtle shell. But if you go into Dendra Temple, you see on the well, you see them in a few places, but Dendra is probably the most well known for it. You see all these winged women, if you like, it's where we get angels from, but they're all playing harps.
There you go.
Now the interesting thing is there was a book written called Angels Don't Play This Harp.
That's right.
And it's kind of brings you back around to Tesla.
That's it.
Nikola Tesla created a system of using the radiant energy of the sun and the earth, and the energy that's just in huge supply all around us, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, naturally. Fair.
And he figured a way with his Wardenclyffe Tower. That's what he was trying to do. He was trying to use the earth itself as a medium by which you could transmit the energy.
Yeah.
And have sender and receiver crystals, or receiver crystals in each household that could just receive the energy without wires, without anything.
Whoa.
And because it's in abundance, infinite supply, it would be free.
Yeah.
So that's why nobody's ever heard of him now, you see. Well, anyway, but you can look up Tesla yourself, but so like if you think of, for example, we were talking about the harp. Again, if you want to look that book, Angels Don't Play This Harp. Unfortunately, after Nikola Tesla died, his patents were taken.
Oh.
And
yes, confiscated by the American government.
And
classified.
There is a so anyway, look up that harp more than if you want yourself anyway. So it's, you know, it's very interesting, the whole kind of even if you read, for example, the Emerald Tablets, since we're talking about Thoth, you know, and you'll find that what's been talked in it is like really highly advanced information
Yeah.
about geometry and numbers, and I think it was it Plato who said if you want to understand the language of God, you've got to be able to speak the language of God,
That's right.
which is numbers.
Wow.
Mm.
There you go.
Processes. So yeah, so the other thing about I mentioned, you know, all the temples were aligned to stars and constellations and things like that, for example, but they were also always aligned to the sun on the solstices and the equinoxes. So there's a whole other thing about how the highly advanced students of the mysteries could actually, they could travel on the light beams.
Wow.
To different, no, I don't mean physically, but their consciousness
Yeah. Wow.
could travel on light beams to, like, I'll just give an example. For example, Karnak Temple is aligned, the inner sanctuary of the Holy of Holies, it's called. It's in darkness all year. It's like Newgrange.
Yeah.
For example, like inside Newgrange is in darkness all year until the light shines in on the. It's not just on the 21st. It's a couple of days either side of the 21st, but the same thing in Karnak Temple. So on this, the light of Sirius and the sun combined would shine in down the access way of the temple and into the inner sanctuary of Karnak Temple, and would illuminate the inner sanctuary. And it only lasted about a couple of minutes.
Wow.
But the combined light of Sirius and the sun would glow red, and so they would be inside the inner sanctuary, just bathed in this red light.
Oh wow.
But you see, the ancient didn't think of this. They had a different idea of the sun
Yeah.
as we have. So in the ancient world, and this again is bringing me back to what Akhenaten was talking about. He wasn't a sun worshipper.
Yeah.
In the ancient world, the sun was considered a portal.
Okay.
It's a stargate. You know, the sun is a star.
Yeah. Exactly.
And the sun in the ancient concept would have been the stargate through which all life comes into this reality. And they would have considered, like, for example, you know, the way they talk about 7 heavens, 7 chakras. We were talking about like 7 days.
Yeah.
Well, we think of 7 as, you know, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. But when they're saying 7, they mean several. Several, more than 7.
Oh.
Several is a word that can be used to denote infinite amounts.
Yeah.
Several means any amount you want it to mean.
Yeah. It doesn't have to mean just 7.
It's yeah, exactly. So, I suppose it would be like, it's really, as I mentioned, it's kind of really highly advanced information that they understood about sound and light.
Oh yeah.
And the
Wow.
interesting thing is, even today when you go to Egypt, they still do the sound and light shows at the pyramids, for example.
That's right. Yeah.
There you go.
And in Karnak, but they're totally degraded.
Yeah. They're not as epic.
No. But one thing, Christine, you actually brought up in the last podcast, and I didn't kind of say anything because we were on a different...
Yeah. Topic.
I kind of... It would have distracted me a bit, but it was a good point. And you mentioned about the Tower, when we were talking about the Tower of Babel.
Yeah.
And you were saying about the 72 chieftains
Yes. Yeah.
that went to the Tower of Babel. Well, that story I just mentioned briefly in the last podcast is told in the book of Ballymote. And if you look in the book of Ballymote, there's actually a drawing of the Great Pyramid in there. But anyway, so the chieftains go to the building of the Tower of Babel, and the interesting thing is, it is Scota or Miriatin who, during the Exodus, when all the people left Egypt because Akhenaten was being, he had
exiled,
to,
right?
the Amun priesthood didn't want him around anymore. So, when all the people had to leave Egypt, and coincidentally, this is the time when the lights went out in Egypt. I was making a point actually there about the Ark of the Covenant as well. I forgot.
Yeah.
In the Bible, it gives you the dimensions. In other words, the size of the Ark of the Covenant. And some clever people took the measurements from the Bible that they're given for the Ark of the Covenant, and measured the sarcophagus in the King's Chamber in the Great Pyramid.
Yeah.
Wow.
And what they discovered was that if there was a thing called the Ark of the Covenant, it fit perfectly inside
Yeah.
the sarcophagus of the King's Chamber, which
Well,
is
there you go.
which is interesting, you know.
Wow.
Because when Akhenaten et al., in other words, and his people
Yeah.
and his lineage left Egypt in what's called the Exodus in the Bible,
Mm-hmm.
the lights went out in Egypt. Literally, the lights went out because they had electricity in ancient Egypt.
Oh,
They had
yeah.
free energy.
Yeah, they
Nikola
did.
Tesla.
You
Yeah.
see all the obelisks everywhere.
Yeah.
Think of
The crystals that
Exactly.
you put in your house if
Exactly.
Nikola Tesla's theory
Exactly.
went through.
exactly.
There you go.
And it
So
was
they had-
grounding all the energy.
Well,
they
so
had
that's-
they had free energy to illuminate houses, to heat
Well,
houses.
yeah, that's
Well,
what-
you didn't need to heat
Well, it's
in
like
Egypt,
the-
but it does actually get quite cold in the winter in Egypt, believe it or not.
There you go. Well, the gender light bulbs, right?
Yes.
Yeah,
Gender
that's like a
temple.
Crookes tube.
Mhm.
That guy, what was his name? Well, it was Crookes, but what was his name? I'm trying to think of his.
Crooks cube. Who was that?
I'm trying to think of his person. Anyway, he was the guy who. I mean, if you look at they're called the dendril light bulbs,
Yeah.
and if you look at a Crookes tube
Yeah.
and how they projected images, in other words, our modern TV.
Yeah.
Um,
So they
you-
might have had TV as well.
There
They
you
could-
go.
Oh, they did. Yeah.
Yeah.
They had more, like Nick. When
Well,
you think,
holograms and all of that.
well, when you look at Nikola Tesla, I mean, he invented like X-rays.
Yes.
Even mobile communication.
mobile phones.
Like
Wow.
all of those things. He was way advanced. And all he wanted was for people to have an easier life.
Yes.
Yeah.
He
Peace
didn't
and
want people
harmony.
to be charged for energy because it's free.
Yeah.
And he was a vegetarian.
I know he had
Made pet
others-
pigeons.
Any pet pigeons, nice.
Yes.
So it says in the about the Tower of Babel and the confusion of the languages. So it says that Gad-El Glass was the grandson of the
Yeah.
one who was building the Tower of Babel, of one of the people who was building the Tower of Babel,
Yeah.
There you go.
and of sometimes he's called different names. What is it? What's his name in the? Oh, it's after gone out of my head. Anyway, and he started the school of languages as well. Gad-El's or Gaithalos in Greek.
Gaithalos, yeah.
In Greek, his name is Gaithalos. In Gaelic, it's Gad-El. So Gad-El was the grandson of, what was his name again? I can't think of it. Who was building the Tower of Babel and who also set up the schools of languages. So
That's no, is it?
no, Gad-El's grandfather, who was it Nil or Nin?
I think Nil sounds about right to me. I could be wrong.
Well, they say Mill sometimes, like Milesian.
Oh,
but
yeah. MIL, I think that's it, yes.
just there's different names from. Anyway, so on the exodus of the people from Egypt, Mary Aten was meant to have met with, or somehow connected with, probably through family lineage and all that, Gad-El Glass. So the reason it's important is because Gad-El, I mentioned Gad-El Glass there. I think I said this before, but anyway.
Translate his name again?
Gad-El Glass means Gad-El the Green.
Gad-El the Green, that's what it's glass is green in Irish.
Glass is green. So Gad-El and Scota, it says Gad-El and Scota brought the Irish, the Gaelic language. Gad-El is Gaelic. That's where the word Gaelic comes from Gad-El.
Gale, yeah.
Gael, exactly.
Gale.
And so it was Mary Aten, Scota, and Gad-El, who it says brought the Gaelic language from the Tower of Babel.
Ooh.
Now, why was the Gaelic language important? Because they said the Gaelic language contained every one of the confused languages
Yeah.
and the original language.
Ooh, it's like a hologram then.
Yeah. So what it says is the Gaelic language, I'll say that again. Do you remember I said the one universal language was confused into 72
Yes.
different languages? Well, it says the reason why the Gaelic language was so important was because it contained all of those 72 languages plus the universal language.
Yeah.
So the story is of it says that there's different kind of stories. I know in the Irish kind of mythology, if you like, there's kind of almost like two Scotas, if you know what I mean. There's two different kind of versions of the story that's told, but anyway, it's about Phineas Fursa, and in some stories it says that Nell or Null, I think, was his grandson. But they went to the plain of Shinar, which is where the Tower of Babel was. Shinar, yeah. And they say that there was a school of languages that was constructed there. And so this is where the whole idea of the 72 languages being embedded in one language, if you like.
Right.
Which also contained not only the 72, but the original universal language. So then anyway, there's a bit of kind of if and anandin about that story and different names for different characters, and there's kind of a whole thing of two Scotas and all. It's just... Anyway, the main story is they came from Gadel and Scota, who in this version, if you like, of the story I'm saying were married. So Gadel, sometimes they say Scota married Nell or Newell in some versions of the story. But I think for me, what I personally think there was a wave of the same lineage coming in, and they were called, like, you know the way you can have a grandmother, and then the grandchild is called the same name.
Yeah.
Like my friend and her mother both had the same name.
Yeah.
So, for example, I've mentioned this before. Akhenaten's mother's name was Taya or Tay. Okay, or Taya. Now, if you look at the Mound of Hostages, and who was supposed to be under the Mound of Hostages, like Tamar, Taya, it's the same name. It's from the same lineage, you know. Where she was... So it says how Gadel... there's another story that why Gadel Glass got his name. Glass means green. And it says that... and this, I think, it comes from the Bible, where apparently he was bitten in the wilderness by a serpent.
Ooh.
Gadel. And apparently his arm went green. And so he got the name Gadel Glass.
Yeah, that's right.
Gadel the Green. So Scota and Gadel, as I said, left the Tower of Babel. So just in case I didn't make it clear, Scota would have been among the people who were the Exodus with Akhenaten's people who were leaving Egypt. And Gadel would have been leaving also because of the Tower of Babel story and the tower being collapsed and all of that. And they took the language in the form of Gaelic with them into Ireland.
There you go.
Now there's a whole story of the Ark of the Covenant, and I'm sure most people know that as well, of how the Ark of the Covenant was apparently brought into Ireland as well by the same lineage.
Oh.
And there's the whole thing about Tara being dug up by in the 50s, was it?
No, it was
or the
it was
70s?
1920s, because it was
The 20s
Yeats
maybe.
and
I think they did it.
Maud Gonne. They might have done it again.
Yeah, I think so. But so they were looking for the Ark of the Covenant, and there's a lot of people who still feel that the Ark of the Covenant is there at Tara. So it's that lineage. And then of course Sean O'Riordan in the 70s, I think it was, when he excavated the Mound of Hostages, found the boy that was called the Tara Prince. Now that has an Egyptian connection as well in the beads that was around his neck. So what I'm saying is those who were found at Tara are of the lineage of Akhenaten's family, are of the lineage of Scota, Gadel, Akhenaten, Tutankhamun. Because Tutankhamun would have been Mariaten's sister, or her uncle, depending on whether he was Akhenaten's son or brother. Yeah. I know that's a bit confusing, but anyway. So really the Gaelic language, you can see why it was a very important language. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And of course,
and was brought back home to be preserved.
Right? So what I'm saying is, in the language, there was loads of information brought back to Ireland. Okay, in the language, in the form of Gaelic.
Yeah.
So you have the whole Tower of Babel story and all of that.
Yeah.
Then you have all the knowledge of, for example, the mystery schools embedded in what I told you was the harp.
Yeah.
The amount of strings, the actual geometric construction of the strings in the proportions of the strings to each other, creating the musical scale. And the actual geometric structure of the harp itself, the wood that's used, everything else.
The Irish harp, yeah.
The Irish harp, yeah.
That is the symbol of Ireland.
Well, the Line of David.
It's the only country that has. Sorry to interrupt you, Antoinette. It's the only country that has an instrument as its, representation.
Is it the only country?
Yeah, I think it's the only country in the world that it's their, official seal has a harp on it.
So it's very interesting, So the amount of information that was brought back in terms of the language and in terms of the musical instrument,
Yeah,
the harp,
exactly.
if you like.
Exactly.
But then there's the whole story of, you know, Tamar and the last king of Israel.
Mm-hmm.
I think I mentioned that before anyway. But so the whole idea of, you know, the Gaelic language being such an important language because it contains such information, and of course we have also the language of the trees, because each letter
Yeah.
is begins with so for example each letter would represent a tree
The
in
alphabet.
in the Gaelic language. So you have Gadael Glass and I mentioned Glass because green, because he got bitten on the arm by a serpent, and it says Moses healed the wound. So we've kind of talked about Moses being Akhenaten.
There you go.
Can I ask a
And
question?
so sorry if you don't
Forget-
mind, I'll
no,
just say
forget
this
it,
because
sure.
I won't actually, but they, you know, there's an area in Dublin called Finglas,
Mm-hmm.
you know, and they say it's called Finglas because they interpret it as meaning clear stream.
Mm-hmm.
The word Finglas meaning clear stream.
Yeah.
So what I'm saying is Finglas is called Finglas, and if you look at the Irish, it's actually Fionn Glass.
Yeah.
So Fionn Glass was a son of Gadael and Scota. Gadael Glass, Fionn Glass.
Whoa.
So they
There you
had
go.
they had a couple of different sons, but one was Fionn the White, Fionn the Green. If you can kind of consider white, green and orange being the flag.
Yeah.
But the flag, actually, the orange bit was put in, it was white and green.
the
or
orange
was it
bit
orange?
was later.
Yeah. But if you
White,
consider
green
the
and
House of
orange.
Orange, which goes back even further in terms of into ancient times, you know.
Mm-hmm.
So, so, and even the Ark of the Covenant itself.
Wow.
I mean, the Ark of the Covenant was, there's many different interpretations of what it was, I suppose. But if we just consider what I was saying about how the dimensions of the Ark of the Covenant, when measured, fit perfectly into the Great Pyramid.
Oh, there you go. The sarcophagus in the Great Pyramid.
Sorry, the sarcophagus, yeah, thanks, Charlotte. The sarcophagus in the King's Chamber of the Great Pyramid.
Wow.
So, again, think about Nikola Tesla, and
Yeah.
think about Nikola Tesla's towers that he was putting all over the earth to try and create free energy, you know, and think of obelisks. You know the obelisks?
Yeah.
And round towers.
Actually,
And round towers, yeah.
that reminds me. I know, me and Antoinette talked about before, not in a podcast, but there was a man. I forget his name, but didn't he figure out how to move stones with like a magnetic?
Edward
Coral
Leeds
castle.
Scallon.
Coral castle.
What's his name?
Edward Leeds Scallon.
Edward Lyons-Glynn.
And he, there was another name for it, and then it became known as Coral Castle.
Yeah, in Florida.
But
Coral Castle.
Coral Castle, yeah. And he said that he discovered the secrets of the ancient pyramid builders.
Mm-hmm.
And some neighbours and young boys apparently were supposed to have seen him levitating stones through the air.
Wow.
So,
Heavy stone.
oh yeah, big heavy
Big,
stones,
huge
yeah. And he
tons.
built the whole of
just
the Coral
moved them
Castle by
around
himself.
Like this.
Yeah.
And he was a
nothing
tiny little guy.
Yeah, picked him up. And
He was
moved
only
him
5 foot something, but apparently he had TB as well.
Yeah.
He was really sick, yeah. And he was only a really small little guy, you know.
Jeez, well, you
Wait,
But
he
he
built
was-
the whole castle as well?
By himself, literally by himself.
Yeah.
And so that was the amazing thing, you know what I mean? But he wrote a book. But anyway, according to him, he had discovered the secrets of the ancient pyramid builders. So this is the information, if you like, the knowledge, the advanced knowledge, if you like, that was brought back into Ireland.
Yeah.
And why was it brought back into Ireland? Because that's where it came from,
Exactly.
you know? And as I've mentioned before, I know I say Ireland more than any, you know, but I'm not just saying Ireland. As I've mentioned before, the landmass that would have been known as Atlantis would have been Ireland, England, Northern Europe and the Scandinavian countries, because it was all one landmass. And you see the evidence of how those landmasses broke up.
Yeah.
And then you have the whole thing about High Brazil. I don't know if anybody...
Yeah, fascinating. High Brazil.
yeah, but I don't know... Yeah, but there's this thing called the Rendlesham Forest Incident.
Yes.
Have you ever heard about that?
No.
Well, it was about these guys. I think they were... were they
Military.
military?
It was
Were they
military.
military?
It was on
Or
a military base in England.
it was military.
Rendlesham Forest.
I was thinking, were they military or...
No, definitely.
But anyway, they were... in England, Rendlesham Forest, and they were on some exercise apparently in the forest at night. But anyway, what was supposed to have happened was a UFO came down apparently, And one of the guys, who I forget his name, he apparently went, I think he either went up close to it and not touched it, but got really close, like, and put his hand out kind of or something like that. I think, unless I'm getting the story wrong. But anyway, there was all these kind of what they described as like hieroglyphs or symbols on
It was glowing.
on the craft itself. I forget all the details of the story, but anyway, what happened was he apparently, I think he did touch it, and he got kind of a major download, as he would have said. But what he said was this, he got in his mind, all he could see was like zeros and ones and zeros and ones and
Binary
all this kind of
code.
stuff, binary, yeah. So he kept it apparently in his mind for a long time and never. Apparently, I think he said he forgot it, and then years later or something, I think it came back to him and he wrote it down, and somebody he was talking to understood new binary code and said, I can tell you what that is. They're actually coordinates.
Whoa.
Now there was I'm not saying that's the only information he got, but part of the information he got in binary code was coordinates. And when they traced the coordinates, it was for the exact area where High Brazil
would have been.
Yeah, because High Brazil was shown on maps up to maybe the 1800s.
Wow.
There's old maps that shows High Brazil. There was maps, excuse me, there was maps found in the Great Pyramid that showed Ireland and High Brazil.
Connected, or like it was beside Ireland?
It was the mythical island that.
No, it wasn't connected. No, it was just off Ireland.
Closer in the more modern times, but there is a book in the big library in Trinity that is a medical book from Galway or something. I read about it, and it is all in black and white. It's like black and white patterns and stuff. A codex, so they have it in Trinity, but it basically says it was a mythical island, and the most amazing healers were there, and it only came up out of the mists
every 7 years. Yeah, it's like
it had a whole thing.
Yeah.
And there was a doctor in Galway that got stuck and went there, and they gave him a book, and he had it in Galway.
Well, it's quite interesting that they're saying High Brazil was a mythical island, right? And I'll tell you why. Because the symbol for High Brazil is what they use for the flag of Brazil today. The symbol for High Brazil was a circle, like a blue circle with a yellow line going through it. That's the flag of Brazil.
Yeah.
So if it was mythology, High Brazil. Brazil is named after High Brazil, and it was they say it was to do with a purple dye. But anyway, so the King Bress, King Bress, who was supposed to have built Thoth.
Yes.
Thoth, where we went there just recently. So it says that Bress was the constructor of Thoth. So Bress is Bressel.
Yes.
High Brazil.
Brazil, Brazil.
High Brazil.
But can I just say one thing? Isn't it, when they were building Douth, wasn't time stopped?
Yes, they stopped the sun.
So I just think that's interesting, because it's to do with Samhain as well. So.
Yeah.
Time stopped?
Yeah, she stopped time so that
workers
could work.
It says Bressel stopped the time.
Oh, was it Bressel?
He stopped the sun. I think him and his
sister.
Yeah, it was between them.
They were druids, and they stopped time so that, like the Tower of Babel, it could all be built in one day.
Yeah, they stopped the sun, and then something happened that broke the spell, and the sun moved, and it set on Thoth, and so it got the name Darkness.
Doof.
Yeah.
Anyway, sorry to interrupt you. Keep
going.
No,
that's fine. So I was just talking. Well, really, no. I mean, I was just saying about how all this information came back into Ireland in the form of, like, say for example, the harp.
Yeah.
And apparently the harp is still tuned to the 432 frequency.
Yeah, it's the only
instrument. I'll actually have to check that, because I was actually thinking of that when you were saying
I think it's the only musical instrument that still is, apparently. Somebody was saying that to me now as well,
I'll have to check that out.
But
because I'm a harpist, so I should know. I was just thinking I might have to experiment tuning my harp to that frequency, but if it already is still,
and
maybe it is. I'll check. Report back to you guys.
Exactly, So I think maybe we'll just wrap it up for now, won't we?
I think so.
Yeah. Okay. All right. So thanks for listening anyway, and hopefully there was something informative in there.
Will we say Happy Samhain?
Happy Samhain.
Happy Samhain, everybody, coming on October 31st.
So take care and talk again soon.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Okay. Bye.
So
bye. Iha hauna hona ditch.
There you go.
Slán. Some Gaeilge for you. That's the language they brought back, right? Well, it would have been H in Gaelic, but
So bye and
bye.
take care.
Bye.
Bye.